Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Castlevania Dracula X. In the last part, we went through stages 3, the alternate 4s, and one of the stage 5s. And now we're going through stage alternate 5, which you need to do if you want to get the true ending. Again, you can only get here if you went to normal stage 4, use the key to free Maria, and then use the other key to go through the door before the Minotaur boss fight. This is our water stage. With that said, the water is still usual Castlevania water. It's just another bottomless pit. No real difference. Except in one room later on in this very stage, but we'll cross that threshold when we get to it. This is probably... if it's not the hardest stage in the game, it's definitely the most dangerous, be it due to the water itself, the amount of enemies in certain areas, or some really odd jumps and platforming compared to the rest of the game, especially in this room right here where we're going to need to jump on some moving platforms. And if you miss, well, I believe you're just straight up dead, I think. Again, it's been a while since I recorded this, so I can't exactly recall. With that said, I want to say this musical track is completely unique, and it's probably my favorite track in the game, because I don't recall this even being in Rondo. If it is, I'm just not hearing it due to the different instrumentation. It's real good. Oddly reminds me of Klonoa of all games. I think it's particularly the percussion that does that for me. Now, thankfully, unlike the stage where we save Maria last part, you don't need to get to a certain point in the stage without dying in order to save Annette in this stage. With that said, you still have one hell of a trek to get through, especially this room here. The water is rising. If it catches up to you, you're dead. And the fact that you have to do this kind of platforming with this control while doing that is a little bit rough. Thankfully, they at least place an invincibility potion along the way, so you can literally just bum rush through the enemies and not have to worry about a thing. And even then, the water does stop once it's about halfway through the second hallway. So once you're on this third level, you can just stop and not worry. But once we're up here, we want to whip that water source right there to reduce the water. Why? Down here is where we're going to find Annette. Richter, my love. I knew you would rescue me. But be very careful. The Count grows more powerful by the minute. With that said, again, like I mentioned last part, there are 3 endings to this game. Whether or not, and that's determined by whether or not you save both, none, or one of the girls. With that said, the only way to save one of the girls is to save Maria and then completely ignore Annette, which honestly is very easy to do, because it's not the most immediately obvious that you can hit that water source. I think the way they want you to figure it out was that the water was raising somehow, but I missed that in my first couple of playthroughs. I had to look up how to get the best ending in the game. That's one of those I can definitely see being requested by the Nintendo helpline back in the day, assuming this game was even like featured on that, like Castlevania 2 was for kneeling on the cliff with the red gem, I think it was. Once you get past that section with the raising water, though, the rest of the stage isn't too hard. Although we have easily one of the biggest replacements of where a boss was in Rondo versus its relative placement in Dracula X. Coming up, the boss we're going to fight is a boss you can fight in stage 1 of Rondo on the alternate pathway. But they put it here for some reason. I recommend getting the stopwatch for it, though, because I feel its item crash is going to be the most useful for it. With that said, moving on to that, the boss of this stage is the weird water serpent from Rondo Blood, whose name I can never remember, and I don't recall easily being able to find back when I looked when I was recording the game, but that's also because I was lazy. It'll jump around the platform in various ways, trying to hit you with either its head, body, or tail along the way, including just rotating around the platform, period, in a really hard-to-avoid way, I find, unless you're just taking it super slowly. It has a couple of little projectile attacks, but ultimately it's a pretty easy boss fight, especially with the item crash of the stopwatch. There are times where its body is counted in 3D space, though, so there are times where you can just walk what is technically right beneath it. It's pretty quick. With that said, keep walking because it's death attack. It's desperation, so just try and hit you like that. Pretty easy to dodge. I don't even think you have to jump to get around it. Also, I forget if I mentioned this already or not, because it's been a couple days since I recorded the first two parts, but for some reason, the instrumentation on the stage clear theme reminds me a lot of Star Fox. I don't know why. It particularly reminds me a lot of, like, the stage clear theme in the original Star Fox, as well as the game over sound effects, or at least the death sound effects. With that said, we're on to Stage 6, the last normal stage in the game, because Stage 7 is the final boss stage. With that said, something I find interesting about Dracula X is that it also tries to do something a little bit different even in its endgame, in that the boss fight of this stage completely depends on whether or not you have saved Annette or not. Also, we get a really kick-ass version of Beginning for this stage. I love this song. If you came here from stage alternate 5, though, I find this is a pretty easy stage to get through because if you're like me, you're always going to have the stopwatch for the early portions of this stage. And the stopwatch is a little bit weird in this game, because the stopwatch I find is a very inconsistent sub-weapon. Sometimes it's a complete time freeze when you use it. Other times it's just a time slow, and in this game it's a time slow, and it feels weird. Also, that was one hell of a chuck from that Axe Knight. Holy shit, that came straight down on my head. It's interesting, though. I was looking around between parts. I distinctly recall this. Apparently, this game is seen as harder than Rondo of Blood mainline, and I guess in some ways I can see it because the continues aren't as forgiving and all that stuff, and there's no save feature. But barring some bad enemy placements, I find at least just going through the game, not getting the best ending, is easier in Dracula X, to me nowadays at least. The stage designs are more dickish, yes, but I find dickishness doesn't exactly equal the same thing as difficulty, you know what I mean? Like, I Want to Be the Guy is dickish. It'll kill you a lot, but not on the prospects of being actually hard. It's meant to trick you. It's kind of like comparing, what's a good comparison? Dante Must Die difficulty versus Hell in Hell difficulty in some of the Devil May Cry games, I suppose. Whereas Dante Must Die is it's a hard challenge, but it's fair to you. Hell in Hell is just, alright, die. Because, oh boy. One shot kills on you, but not the enemies. That's just rude. With that said, there are some pretty annoying jumps in this stage, because this is meant to be our clock tower for the game. And in particular, this room is where I tend to die a lot because of these floating skull enemies over bottomless pits. Always fun. I don't know why, the cross boomerang really got more and more useful in the classic Castlevania as it went on. The Holy Water was still generally the more useful sub-weapon, but as the games went on, the cross boomerang got pretty good. It's especially great in Castlevania 4, where I think it's just straight up the best sub-weapon, I believe. Things are a little bit different in Bloodlines, though, because Bloodlines had a bit of a different set of things. And I appreciate that. Bloodlines is the kind of delightfully different I enjoy from a spin-off of a mainline platformer. And God, sometimes jumping with these controls on gears is annoying. Being dedicated to your jump arc while working with conveyor belt-like platforms is never a good combination. It's one thing I've always liked about Mega Man, for what it was at the time on the NES in particular. Mega Man was one of the few platformers outside of like Mario that were like the super popular ones, where you weren't super dedicated to your jumps. Ninja Gaiden you were as well, as were Mario, for that instance, but with how the game's platforming worked, Mega Man, you probably had the most fluid control. I know not Castlevania, Metroid, you were also very married to your jumps arc once you started it. Either way, we're coming up on the boss fight, but like a couple of other boss rooms in the series, check just to the right for a hidden little treat to help you out with the boss fight ahead. A 1-up in this case. Now, because I have rescued Annette, we are going to be fighting a pretty staple enemy for the franchise here. It's time for our good old friend, as soon as he decides to show up. I have to progress forward a little bit. Okay. It's time for Death. Death is going to fly over the screen, trying to hit you with either his main sickles or the ones that come out from the sky. Cross boomerang is really good for this because you can potentially hit him upwards of 2 to 3 times, depending on how he decides to move. Again, like with some of the other instances in the game, the little white stuff he's exerting was just blood in the Japanese version, but they censored it for the US and I think PAL regions? With that said, being Death, this might look a little easy, and it's because it is. Death is a multi-phase fight, though, so he's going to get a chance to do stuff a bit more annoyingly. Because once you reach the second half of his health bar, he's going to come down the platform in a proper Grim Reaper attire, in which case he's going to have a giant attack arc, but I always just save my item crashes for that phase, and he dies pretty quickly. I believe he decapitates himself in the Japanese version with his scythe there, by the way. I might be thinking of Rondo. I forget if they kept that in for the Super Nintendo version, period, in Japan. But that's only a boss fight you can fight there. In the case you didn't save Annette in stage alternate 5, either by proxy of just not going to that stage or missing her while you're there, we fight a different boss fight here. This is Carmilla. She transforms Annette into a vampire, and now we have a giant skull to fight. Between the two, with how the sub-weapons work in this game, I think Annette is the harder fight because her attacks can go off even while she's stun-locked like that. With that said, her attacks are pretty simple. Her eyes will light on fire and try to hit you directly, or they'll circle themselves around and try to hit you directly. I believe she has a lightning attack of some sort she can do eventually, but she seldom gets a chance to do it. She's easier with the right sub-weapons, but I feel harder in terms of avoiding attacks because you can't exactly take her attacks out as easily. And that's stage 6. I feel both boss fights are relatively easy compared to the stage that are attached to it, at least, because the clock towers are usually relatively annoying stages in Castlevania games, but it's pretty straightforward at the end of the day. Which is admittedly one thing I like about Dracula X, even compared to Rondo Blood. It's at least relatively straightforward with its levels, even as dickish as they can be, or weird at times in terms of just choices with enemy placements. And thus we're on to the final stage, stage 7. I don't know how he got from the clock tower all the way over there on the right to here, but I'll take it. Now this stage is a little bit weird, in that it's got some, first off, a weird amount of Castlevania 1 throwbacks with the zombie placements. But they just kind of place enemies haphazardly all over the place, but there's also one especially weird instance where the level loops on itself. Also, the song here is a very weird remix of Vampire Killer, and I'm not the biggest fan of it, honestly. I think it's probably the worst track in the game. Alright, the weird part's here. You see how there's a platform in the top left of the screen there? A door later on in the screen that the level design seems to lead you into leads back there, but there's no reason to really go there? Like, I think I've only accidentally fallen for that trap maybe once, because the level design clearly also continues up. I am admittedly a fan of this part of the music, though. I don't know why. Just something about the constant build-up is really nice. If you head right now is when you'll go to the loop. I don't know why, but it just does. You always want to go to the top left, though. I think if you go left, you just end up in the next room, but not in the place you want to be. Because now we have awkward platform jumps. Great. With that said, as long as you jump while the platform is starting to move right, you'll probably hit your destination, no problem. Compared to the jumps in, say, Rondo or Castlevania 4, where you need to jump on the whatever the weird little grandfather clock thing is that swings left and right. There's a name for it I can never remember. You're gonna be fine. And we're already right at Dracula. Take the sub-weapon of your choice. I tend to take either the stopwatch or the cross boomerang. And prepare for hell. Because this is an annoying-ass Dracula fight. We are on a series of very thin platforms that he randomly chooses one of to teleport to and fire either his normal hellfire, which is the 3 fireballs that travel forward, or the meteor version that is just 2 larger meteorites that take up roughly the same space. One you can jump over, one you can duck under. you can only hit phase 1 in the head. Prepare to get used to that laugh you're hearing in the background, because you do very little damage to him, and he teleports randomly. He can be on the exact opposite side, and you just might never be able to hit him. This is easily the most annoying Dracula fight in the Classicvanias, but not by proxy of actual difficulty, it's just tedious. I do not like this fight. I honestly wish phase 2 had more health and phase 1 had less, because then I would be out of this a lot sooner. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of this Dracula sprite. I think the sprite he had in Rondo/Symphony of the Night was just better. Also, I learned something interesting between parts. The manual I mentioned, I think it was part 2, used the actual Rondo Blood character art for its character bios. The Japanese version had completely new art made in the style of the cutscenes from this game, which makes me wonder why they didn't use that. Either way, because this fight takes a while, I'm fast-forwarding the rest of phase 1 just to save us some time. I think this was like 3 to 5 minutes when it wasn't sped up. It's bad. There are so many more interesting ways they could have done this fight. Just having it be platform spam over a place where you could easily get knocked off into bottomless pits, that's not good difficulty design. That's just being a dick. With that said, one little trick you can do to avoid the knockback. I believe if you're ducking you get hit, you don't get knocked back as much, if at all. But phase 2, he's a giant buff demon wearing a Speedo. And if you use the stopwatch item crash, he dies pretty quickly. He has a giant shockwave attack. He can cause the platform he's on to be surrounded by lightning. He dies pretty quick. Phase 2 is a lot easier than phase 1. I do like this little kneeling sprite, though. That's kind of cool. And with that, that is game. I do really like that ending piece there. But that's Dracula X, Castlevania, the lesser stepchild of the fantastic Rondo of Blood on the PC Engine. Before I get into my opinions on the game, the one thing I should note, the background image here we're seeing is the best ending, with both Annette and Maria saved. The other endings are, as I mentioned before, not saving anyone, which is the top, and only saving Maria, which is the bottom. I've seen rumors that there's one where you can save just Annette, but from my experience, there's no way to do that, because I believe if you take the key that you're meant to use to open Maria's door over to the door at the end of stage 4, you just can't open it with it. It's technically a different key. Dracula X is awkward, I think is the best way to put it. There's some good remixes in here. There's some cool sprite work over here and there. But the stages, while I find they're ultimately easier in some cases than the Rondo stages, they're less interesting. The stages just feel cluttered with enemies that are placed really oddly. It's just kind of there. It's the lesser Castlevania game on the Super Nintendo. If you're looking for one of them, just play Castlevania 4. I feel that game is not only more interesting to play, I feel its music's better paced. It's definitely a better looking game in my eyes. It's probably my least favorite Classicvania, including Castlevania 2, because while Castlevania 2 had problems for being a Metroidvania the way they wanted it to be back when, I can at least get away with having fun with some of its oddities, so to speak. This one's just kind of there, ultimately. It's fine, but there's just better things to play. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great night. Take care. And I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. See you guys then.